Afternoon and welcome everyone to another Capitol Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I'm Christopher Baxter, Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight PA. In the past, some might have described this election cycle as a quiet one, but that is certainly not the case this year or really any year. The state Supreme Court has been central to many consequential decisions in the past 2 years, and with a seat hanging in the balance, every voter has a stake in the outcome. And then there are several other appellate court races that will also affect everyone across Pennsylvania. So we have a lot to talk about today. We have a great turnout. I'm so happy to see everyone. We want to get started. First, we have just a few programming items to get through. For those of you who are new to Spotlight PA's work or our programming, we're an independent, nonpartisan newsroom producing investigative and accountability journalism about the state government and urgent statewide issues. We share all of our journalism at no cost with 77 community newsrooms across the state, all part of our mission to better inform, equip, and empower Pennsylvanians everywhere. Our work is driven by a deep sense of public service, and it's powered by you, our readers and members. Simply put, without your support, Spotlight PA would cease to exist. Consider any number of Spotlight PA stories, investigations, events, or more that you've read or attended in the past 2 years. And then consider the fact that none of them would have ever happened without readers like you saying, yes, I value this work and I will support it. So I'm asking everyone who is able today to please take a moment right now and pay what you can for this event by visiting spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, the address is spotlightpa.org/donate. We feel here that it's very important to offer our events at no cost to everyone in Pennsylvania because everyone should have access to this kind of information and our fact-based journalism, but they're not free to produce. So we rely on the honor system. We're asking those who are able to help us keep these events free for all, and so we can continue them. Again, this is entirely an honor system, but we do rely on your support. Again, the address is spotlightpa.org/donate. If you are already a member, I want to thank you very much. You make all of this work possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A few last housekeeping items you've probably already seen, but just in case, we're recording today's event to share it with those who couldn't make it. Thank you to all who have sent questions in advance. We'll get to as many of those as possible. If you have not yet asked a question, you can use the Q&A feature right here in Zoom. To do that, just click the Q&A icon in the bottom toolbar, type in your question, and we'll get to, again, as many of those as possible. Now, I'm excited to introduce one of Spotlight PA's editors, Sarah Ann Hughes, who will be moderating this afternoon and who will introduce our esteemed panel of experts. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. As Chris said, I'm Sarah Ann Hughes, Deputy Editor of Spotlight PA. Absolutely thrilled to be here today moderating this panel of experts on the appellate court races that you'll see on the November 2nd ballot. Before I introduce them, I do just want to note that these are not the only races you're going to see on your ballot. There are a number of municipal races as well for mayor, council members, school board members, which we have a guide to how to vet your candidates on spotlightpa.org that you might want to check out. And these also aren't the only judges. There are courts of common pleas. There are also some folks will be asked to vote on their magisterial or municipal court judges. These are the judges that handle evictions and traffic tickets and just a number of really, really consequential decisions that affect everyday Pennsylvanians. So I just want to emphasize that these are not the only races you'll see on your ballot, and I really encourage everyone to make sure to try to access a sample ballot before you actually vote so that you can vet and understand what you're going to be asked to vote on, either now if you have a mail ballot or in November if you go to the polls. That said, I'm really thrilled about the panelists we have assembled here today to talk about the appellate court races. We have Danielle Ohl. She is Spotlight PA's Capitol reporter who put together a really wonderful guide to the appellate court races that you can read and access on spotlightpa.org as well. We have Khadija Kenner. She is executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project, a nonprofit that seeks to mobilize and organize a generation of younger and diverse voters. She's also co-chair of Why Courts Matter PA. And then we also are joined by Kathleen D. Wilkinson, who's president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. It's a membership organization for lawyers in the state that provides a number of services to them, as well as to members of the public and the media. That includes the judicial ratings we are going to discuss today. So again, thank you three so much for joining us. First, I want to ask you a question, Danielle. So can you just give us a general breakdown of the three appellate courts in Pennsylvania and what sort of cases they handle?
Sure, yeah, and happy to be here. Thank you everybody for coming. It's so great to have a big crowd. So yeah, Pennsylvania, like Sarah said, has three appellate courts. The biggest court is the Superior Court. That's, as far as you can go in the state. And that is a court that has discretion in the kinds of cases that it takes. So it's not going to hear every case or every appeal that is brought before it. It's going to choose things that it thinks, it should weigh in on, matters of constitutionality that it perhaps disagrees with the Superior Court on, perhaps not. There are 7 justices that make up that court. Right now, the makeup is 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. That's how they were elected. And Republican Justice Thomas Saylor is retiring at the end of the year. So that is kind of why this court is up for discussion right now. There is going to be a race for that seat on the Superior Court in November.
Sorry, Danielle, interrupt you. Yep, just the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court, sorry. Moving on to the Superior Court. That is one of the 2 intermediate appellate courts. There's 15 seats on it. There is a judge retiring, so there is a seat open there. The Superior Court is gonna be the one that handles thousands of appeals cases. There are high profile appeals cases that reach the Superior Court. Think rapper Meek Mill, his case reached the Superior Court, also Bill Cosby. Those are, high profile, but not the common ones. Commonly, you're gonna see anything from, criminal cases that are disagreed with to, civil cases that, anybody can try to overturn if they disagree with a ruling on the lower court. That case, or that court, like the other courts, has just judges that have, they come up for retention every 10 years. So after they're elected, you're going to see them on your ballot in 10 years to say yes or no. Does this person stay or does this person go? The last of the appellate courts is the Commonwealth Court, which is, if not unique to Pennsylvania, there are a few states that have this type of court, has 9 seats, and it is going to handle any kind of government related matters. So, you see in the news cases where a Democratic caucus is suing their Republican counterparts, or a Republican caucus is suing the administration or Governor Wolf. These are going to all land in Commonwealth Court. Same thing with the retention after 10 years. Right now, there are 2 seats up for grabs at that level, and there's going to be 4 candidates on the ballot for those 2 seats, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and the top vote getters will fill those. So that's kind of the overview of what the appellate court looks like. Yeah.
And unlike the primary, when Democrats and Republicans each voted for their own candidates, this election is a matchup for these races between, it's a Democrat versus a Republican, right? But anybody can vote on these races regardless of party. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're statewide. Yeah. And yeah, you should be able to vote for whoever in the general.
Thank you, Danielle. And so I want to turn this over to Kathleen from the Bar Association. So Kathleen, your Judicial Evaluation Commission issues ratings and an explanation for those ratings for appellate court candidates. Can you talk about the process for creating those ratings? How does the commission vet the candidates and come up with the level of recommendation or not to recommend them? How do they get to that point?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to be here. Again, my name's Kathleen Wilkinson. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, the 127th president to hold this position. The Judicial Evaluation Committee independently. There are 18 voting members who have to pledge that they're not going to be involved in participating in any campaigns. They're going to refrain from supporting any candidates. Everything will be done confidentially. The commission also includes lay people and requires that there can be 12 attorneys, but the rest of the 18 members will be non-attorneys. So we also have members of the community that are vetting the candidates. The Judicial Evaluation Commission has a separate entity, which is the investigative arm of the commission that is also comprised of attorneys as well as lay people. The candidates have to prepare a questionnaire. They have to sign certain things in accordance with our rules. This is confidential. After they submit, the investigation team has panels that are broken down that investigate each and every candidate. They in turn report back to the commission, and then there's a process whereby the candidate will have appeared before the investigative team. Then the candidate will appear again before the commission. The commission will hear the candidate's statements, and other information will be brought before the commission. And after due deliberation and the gathering of all this information, which is quite extensive, then they issue a rating. And the ratings are as follows. There's the rating of highly recommended, the rating of recommended, and then the non-recommended rating. The non-recommended rating is given if a candidate decides not to participate in the process. It'll be noted, not recommended, did not participate in the process. With regard to the other ratings, a candidate could potentially be rated as not recommended based on the lack of legal ability or the lack of experience or an issue with integrity or temperament or any combination thereof, or maybe there's other circumstances that make a candidate not ready to be a judge. The highly recommended rating is where the candidate is found to be of the highest combination of legal ability, the highest caliber of experience, integrity, and temperament, and would be capable of performing in an outstanding way as a judge or a justice of the court for which he or she is a candidate. And please note, we only rate the appellate judges, as was noted at the outset. So for example, the Supreme Court, if you're elected, that position would make you a justice of the Supreme Court. The other courts, Superior Court and Commonwealth Court, you would be serving as a judge. The recommended rating is based, again, on legal ability, experience, integrity, and temperament. And the candidate has been found to be able to perform satisfactorily as a judge or justice of the court for which he or she is seeking office. So in brief, that's a description of the process. It is entirely non-partisan. We don't get involved in which party the candidates may or may not be affiliated with. It's completely based on their experience and the criteria that we are looking for nonpartisan completely. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, Kathleen. That was a really wonderful overview. And as you said, there are times when the Bar Association will not recommend someone. This year, Stacey Wallace, who's a candidate for Commonwealth Court, is not recommended because, and this is a quote, she lacks the depth and breadth of experience and preparation necessary to take on the commanding role of judge on the Commonwealth Court. Not commenting on Stacey specifically, but I'm curious if you can just expand a little bit more on what type of experience makes someone suited for these benches. what kind of background or training or real life experiences really sets someone up to be a successful appellate judge?
Well, I'm not going to speak about any particular candidate, including the candidate whose name you just mentioned. But I would say this, that, what the Judicial Commission, Evaluation Commission is looking for is candidates that are of the highest possible integrity, the highest possible experience. Things, for example, such as, have they served on other courts before? Sometimes a candidate may run to become a judge of the Superior Court or the Commonwealth Court, and they may not have served as a judge before, yet they have experience with appellate work, for example. Maybe they've spent their legal career writing appellate briefs, arguing before the Superior Court or the Commonwealth Court. So they know the system, they know how the system works. Or maybe they clerked for a judge of the Commonwealth Court, the Superior Court, or a justice of the Supreme Court. So that's an example of experience. On the other hand, you may also have candidates running who have been Court of Common Pleas judges. So they've already served maybe in Philadelphia or Allegheny County or Erie County, and they're running for Commonwealth Court or Superior Court, or for being a justice of the Supreme Court. So, we look to that type of courtroom experience. So we're really looking for, experience in those areas. On the other hand, it could be someone maybe doesn't have that same type of experience, but maybe they were a professor and they taught for years about the Supreme Court and the Commonwealth Court. So that's an example. And the years of experience do matter. If someone maybe just graduated law school, last year, I wouldn't suggest that would be wise to try to right away try to become a judge of an appellate court. You may not have enough experience. Maybe on the other hand, that lawyer just became admitted in Pennsylvania, but worked in another state and was barred in New Jersey or maybe New York. So I think you understand what we're looking for. These are very important courts. In these courts, very important decisions are made. In all courts, very important decisions are made. So we like to see experience, integrity, professionalism, the type of service, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for Kathleen. And you've set me up perfectly to ask Khadija Kenner, who again is co-chair of Why Courts Matter PA, which I think is the perfect question to start with. Why do these courts matter? How do the cases that they hear and the decisions that they make impact Pennsylvanians across the state?
Thank you for that question, Sarah. Thank you, Spotlight PA, for having this panel today. Being involved in an organization called Why Courts Matter, you would imagine that lots of folks have questions about the courts. And I spend a lot of time with that organization and with the current organization, New Pennsylvania Project, really talking about the importance of the courts, but having to break down the difference first, right? So, I come to this work not as an attorney or a judge. I come as a layman who tries to break down these terms and ways in which people will really understand. And so it's really important that when we're talking about the courts, that we really break them down and talk a little bit about federalism, right? And why we have federal courts versus state courts, so that people really understand what it is that state courts are able to do versus what our federal courts are able to do. And so when we talk about why courts matter, we talk about the fact that this could be someone's best day of their life before a judge, or their worst day in their life in front of a judge. And so courts matter to our individual lives because all the issues that we care about are usually arbitrated in courts, be it federal or state courts. And so if you're someone who has concerns about gun violence, or you have concerns about reproductive justice, if you have concerns about your voting rights, it are the courts here in the Commonwealth that are going to be final arbiters a lot of times. They're not going to see federal courts unless it's going to involve our federal government and our United States Supreme Court. So our Pennsylvania Constitution is very important. And it's important that we have judges who will be nonpartisan, or, not impartial, I should say, impartial to what's happening. It's also important that they be independent, free, and fair. And so when you think about how this is important to the everyday Pennsylvania, you think about the cases that are heard by these courts, and we have to break down the mystique, right? So there's this unseen love or that many have for the courts and what the courts can do because they can disperse justice, right, on your best day. And so we want to make sure that we're able to talk about the cases that happen in these courtrooms that impact individuals' lives. And Danielle mentioned earlier, she talked about the Meek Mill case, right? And so you talk about how this impacts someone on the ground. How does this impact someone's everyday life? Well, if you're someone who received a trial that was not fair, you're going to need the appellate courts to hear your case again so that you can receive justice. And it was the Meek Mill case in which she was initially jailed on drug and gun charges, that his case then touched many courts, many appellate courts here in Pennsylvania before the final decision was made. And so if you're someone who's going to spend 5 months in jail, or you're going to spend 2 years in jail or more, that makes a huge impact on your life. And so that is one particular case when we talk about the kinds of court cases that are heard by these appellate courts. We're trying to make sure that we understand the kind of cases that they hear, because Pennsylvanians, we're one of a very few states that actually get to elect our judges. This isn't common. And so when you're someone who lives in the Commonwealth and you have the opportunity to vote for a judge that could potentially hear your case one day, this is a great opportunity for you to make sure that you're aware of the court system, and then make sure that you're selecting the correct candidates, that are important to you in your life. I want to bring up one more case that was heard in one of the appellate courts here in Pennsylvania. And I think about the court case that was heard by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, right? And we hear about the case that involved Miss Vivette Applewhite, who was going to have her vote. She was going to be disenfranchised from an election. She's 100 years old, unable to access voter ID. And so she was the lead plaintiff in a case that reached the Supreme Court to ensure that the 2012 ruling on voter ID was unconstitutional. So that's the types of cases that are heard. It's going to protect your voting rights. If you're someone who has been a victim of crime, you're going to know that cases are heard by the Superior Court that are going to be relative to what's happening in your life. I think about folks like a young gentleman named JR. He was shy of his 14th birthday before he was actually killed by a friend of his by accident with a gun. And he is someone that the court had to actually hear a case to make sure that his parents were able to seek accountability and justice for his death. And that case was heard by the Superior Court. And so there's lots of examples of on the ground, where it's really impactful for people's individual lives that are heard by appellate courts. And like I said, it's either going to be the best day of your life or maybe it's the worst day of your life, but it's so important that you become aware about who it is that are running for these seats so that you can make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah, that was extremely well put. And I just wanted to respond to something I saw in the chat, which is the candidates. So there are a number of candidates. There's too many to get into their backgrounds and their qualifications here. We have a complete guide. We're also going to link out to we have links in our guide to the Pennsylvania Bar Association's ratings, which again, go into detail, have questionnaires. You can really dig in and vet the candidates. So I just want to emphasize that that's available online. And just in terms of fairness, there are just too many candidates for us to get in this short amount of time. But to what Khadija was talking about, Danielle, I'm curious, as somebody who covers the Capitol, what cases like right now are being considered in our appellate courts that people might not realize are being heard in these courts, but that have really big statewide implications? Sure.
I mean, the one that immediately comes to mind, just because it's been a part of my life for the last couple of weeks, is the fight over, vetting and investigating the 2020 election. There are a group of Republican senators on a committee who issued a subpoena to the State Department asking for a really vast collection of personal identifying information from every voter in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of opponents to that action and to that disclosure. People are concerned about data breaches, potentially sensitive information getting into the hands of people who would use it for, bad things. So there were a number of lawsuits filed to stop that subpoena. They have been consolidated into one case, which is currently before the Commonwealth Court. And the Commonwealth Court has been, it's a little bit more politically interesting, I guess I would say, than the Superior Court. But like Khadija said, Superior Court it's not going to be as flashy, but it's going to be, pretty much the place where a lot of important decisions are going to be made, and sometimes is the court of last resort for folks, because the Supreme Court cannot take up everything and isn't able to hear the thousands of cases that they're petitioned to hear. So that is, I just want to make a note, you're not able to say like, oh yeah, there's a fight going on in the Superior Court with these, political implications, but they do have real life implications. But the Commonwealth Court heard a number of cases, that has to do with, again, like I said at the top, anything that is going on in your government. So anything, if there's an issue with the legislature, one of the departments, that's going to land in Commonwealth Court.
Right. The school mask lawsuit,
Yes.
for example, right? That is currently in Commonwealth Court, expected likely to be appealed to the Supreme Court. But as you said, they can say yes or no. So that court again can be the sort of last stop. We have so many really fantastic, excellent questions that I want to make sure that I get some in here before we talk about the future of the courts. Linda L. had asked, why is there so little information on judges standing for retention? While Richard W. asked, why aren't the party affiliations noted next to the names of judges on the retention questions? So again, appellate judges they are elected to 10-year terms, and then they are up for what's called retention. Kathleen, can you explain a little bit more about retention elections and also why the party name is no longer included next to the judge who's running?
Absolutely. So number one, we do have the same process of evaluating a candidate for retention, as I explained before. They still go through the full process. However, because they're being retained, there's no one running against them. The sole issue before the voters is whether this particular candidate still possesses the requisite criteria that I just described earlier, that he or she should remain a judge of that particular court for another 10 years. So therefore, you don't see the political affiliation. It's not relevant to our job. We don't take into account political affiliation. It's solely based on their criteria of being a judge, as I described above. So normally, unless there's something extremely unusual in a candidate, we would expect, in most instances, that these candidates will be recommended for retention. Now, from time to time, there's always an exception to that. But if the voter somehow came in and decided that a particular candidate was not worthy to be retained, they could vote no. And if there were so many no's, then that position would open. And then the next time, someone else would run to fill that position. So that's why. I hope that clarifies that for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to emphasize something that Kathleen said, because it was a question asked by Erica P. Yes, if there are enough no's, then that person no longer will not keep their seat any longer. But Kathleen, as we noted when we were talking before, that is exceptionally rare, correct?
It is rare. It happens on occasion, but it's very rare. But the people will, something will turn up, arguably in the investigation process, that might cause us not to recommend a retention. I'm saying it's a judicial evaluation commission. I'm not involved in the process at all.
Sure.
But on the other hand, it's up to the voters ultimately. The voters can vote. It's their decision ultimately whether they want to vote yes or no for retention of that candidate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathleen. So we have a question from Faith D that I think leads really well into Something I wanted to touch on at least briefly before we get into some more of these sort of nitty-gritty questions. What has happened to the movement to have judges appointed rather than elected? What are the pros and cons of that? And I think that leads into a really interesting question about what do the future of our courts look like in Pennsylvania? Danielle, can you just briefly touch on one of the sort of more one of the proposals out there to sort of change the way that our court system would be populated?
Yeah, of course. So right now there is an effort underway by Republican legislators to change the way that judges, we vote for judges in the state. Right now, I think we mentioned early on, you can vote for, a judge no matter where you are in Pennsylvania. There is an effort to create judicial districts similar to the way you vote for other elected officials. And, you have a district, people run for that district. And that is, advocates say a way to kind of distribute the power geographically. Of course, that the population centers in Pennsylvania are its cities, which do skew Democratic. So there is an effort underway by Republican legislators to change that. They're doing it via constitutional amendment. The process to, amend the Pennsylvania Constitution is to pass a resolution twice, and it's consecutive, right? Sessions, Sarah? Yeah, okay. Everybody's giving me the thumbs up. Pass a resolution twice. They've done it once. There is a resolution now in this session to try to pass again. It is not currently, I haven't seen it come up on any of the agendas, but it is early, in the fall session. So it is possible that it comes up again, and they have through, the end of the session next year to do that before, if it is passed, it gets on the ballot. And then the voters choose whether or not to approve that constitutional amendment. So that would vastly change the way that courts work in PA, because, I'm curious to see if it will go through or not, because that is similar to the, the redistricting effort. That would be a huge effort to draw that map and then, have justices and judges elected out of those districts.
Yeah, and I think that it dovetails really nicely into a conversation about how Pennsylvania, we have partisan elections for our judges, which is not how it's done in every state. There are also appointees, and the idea of exactly how do you pick a judge and how are they qualified. But Kadita, I was wondering, when we're thinking about why courts matter, how do you think the role of the courts could change in the future in Pennsylvania? Do you see them becoming, a venue where some of the biggest issues of our day are sort of decided even more? I also wanted to bring up that we have a gubernatorial election next year, right? Which is pretty important in our state. Currently, we have a Democratic governor, a GOP-controlled legislature. That could easily change. So how do you see the courts, maybe their role changing or staying the same in our state?
The role of the courts could actually change to become more political if we are to allow for instances of what Danielle was discussing, which we've termed judicial gerrymandering. If we allow for legislators to try to take power that is not theirs and usurp power over the judicial courts, that sets up lots of problematic issues for the state. When we talk about an opportunity for legislators to then draw districts of which we would elect our appellate judges, when currently, there are 31 folks who sit on our appellate courts. Right now, in this moment, as Pennsylvanians who are eligible to vote, we get to vote for all 31 of our judges that sit on the appellate courts. And that's important. There is no, Elk County way or Montgomery County way to discern the Pennsylvania Constitution. We get that local flavor, from our common pleas judges. So if you want to know who your common pleas judge is, and you've seen them cutting grass on a Sunday, or you attend service with them, you'll get that from the common pleas level. But when it comes to our appellate courts, they are not beholden to constituents, they're beholden to the Constitution of Pennsylvania. And so it is of the mind of many that you'll politicize the courts if you start breaking them up into districts and allow for them to be then gerrymandered by legislators who will create those districts to determine where it is we actually get to vote for our judges. I don't want legislators telling me where it is that I'm allowed to vote for a judge. If currently I'm allowed to vote for 31 judges, I want to vote for 31 and not 3 that the legislative branch tells me I'm allowed to. So I think that the future of the court means that we need to protect the future of the courts here in Pennsylvania. We need to protect their independence. We need to make sure that they are not gerrymandered. We need to make sure that they are not brought into political acts as they have been in the most recent months. I mean, you think about the cases they've had to decide in the last few months in terms of our 2020 election, whether or not votes should count, et cetera. So I think that the future of the courts is right now in the hands of Pennsylvanians. As long as we can continue to come out and vote in judicial elections in record numbers, that's important that we do that while we continue to vote for our judges. If we do move, as many would like us to move into other ways in which judges are appointed, perhaps by commissions or perhaps by governors, as other states do, that's open for discussion as well. I just know that in this current moment, if we talk about wanting to have a representative government, I can tell you that our appellate courts in Pennsylvania are not representative of the Commonwealth's demographics. We currently have only one person of color who sits on all of our appellate courts. So one person of color in 31 seats. That's Judge Carolyn Nichols, who sits on the Superior Court. We have to do a much better job if we're talking about the future of the courts, and we want people to have trust and faith in our judicial system. They need to see folks who look like them on these benches as well. And so when we're talking about the future of the courts, we need to make sure we're talking about the protection of the courts, protect them from dark money, protect them from outside governmental bad acts that could come their way that includes judicial gerrymandering.
Thank you, Khadija. And thank you again for highlighting that fact, which not sure many people know how extremely non-diverse the appellate court benches are. But yes, that's such a good point. Again, I want to be mindful of time. I have some questions that I wanted to throw to the group. So again, we didn't discuss magistrates today. There are more than 500 in the state. They are again, they are a really, really critical, important part of the judicial system in Pennsylvania. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ralph G. Pointed out that they do not need to have a legal background. They don't need to be lawyers. They don't need to be judges. There is training that they have to go through if they get elected, but they don't have to be members of the bar. Kathleen, he asked if the Bar Association has an opinion, which I'm now guessing probably not, but about whether or not district magistrates, whether or not does the Bar Association have an opinion on the fact that they don't need to have a legal background? But more broadly, I'm wondering, both Kathleen and Khadija, if you are aware of resources for people who want to learn about their magistrates, what the best way for somebody to sort of say, okay, this is who I'm voting for, how do I learn more about them?
Well, this is Kathleen Wilkinson. We don't weigh in on magistrate judges. The Judicial Evaluation Commission only weighs in on appellate judges. So we don't have a position on that. But I would say that certainly you have your independent organizations, the League of Women Voters, for example. There are forums sometimes in your local community. So look for local resources on that. And I just wanted to add that to Khadija's excellent points with regard particularly to all judges must apply the rule of law. All judges must be independent. When you're a judge, it's completely independent without regard to whatever political party you may have belonged to, or maybe you didn't belong to any political party. Your position is to apply the law and to be fair, as was said earlier.
No, thank you for that, Kathleen. Khadija, do you have any thoughts about people who want to learn more about magistrates?
Yeah, I think this is the perfect test case in this moment, is that we have to go through this to find out how how we find out information about judges that we're going to vote on and why it's so difficult for people to make these decisions. When they get into the ballot box, if you're not aware of before you go into the ballot box of what you're going to see on that ballot, it's going to be very difficult for you to make decisions. And so there are organizations, there's a non-partisan, nonprofit organization called Better Civics. If you go to bettercivics.org, that information can help you learn more about the courts, the structure of the courts. I believe they also have information about who's running for office in this time, so you can make an informed decision in a nonpartisan way, make an informed decision for yourself. But I think that this is like a testimony of the fact that we need to do better education around our courts, because we are one of the very few states in the country that elect our judges. They're so important to our daily lives, and we need to provide more education to folks about what it is they do and who it is that are running for these judgeships. So I'm grateful to Spotlight PA for having this panel discussion today, because this tells us that we need more education on this issue, and we need to bring it to the masses.
And Kathleen, I just wanted to follow up really quickly, which is someone asked why the Bar Association doesn't do this type of rating for magistrates. If I had to guess, I'd say it's because there are 521, and that would be.
That's the answer. Yeah, that's the answer, because our Judicial Evaluation Commission only investigates and goes through this process. Education. We are willing to participate in education with regard to the appellate court judges. We sometimes co-sponsor forums that are held by Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, for example, which is another independent organization. We also hold forums independent of that to try to educate the voters. So I would also suggest that, look for those type of forums, whether it's for appellate candidates, or there may even be forums of some sort in your local county where you could get better information.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So another, and just a quick question for you, Kathleen. Jeanette asked, we said that it's rare that a judge is not retained. Do you have any examples of when that's happened and what were the circumstances around it? I know that almost a decade ago, I suppose, our appellate court system was getting a lot of attention, not for the right reasons, and a number of judges had to resign. But I'm just curious to know if you have any specific examples for those watching today about folks who weren't retained and the circumstances around that.
I think those are probably the examples I would recall. And I also saw in the chat, they were asking, how many votes do you need to do that? Well, it's by the majority of
Right.
votes. So if the majority of votes say no, then that judge will not be retained. It's also happened on the local level as well, in various courts of common pleas around the state, around the Commonwealth. Again, it's hard to think of specific examples, but I'm remembering some of the ones that you just cited too.
If I can jump in there, Sarah, for a second, yeah. Yeah, okay, all right. If I can jump there for a second, it's very difficult to not retain a judge. If there is someone that's currently sitting on a bench and they've been there for 10 years, after 10 years of sitting on a bench, you should kind of know how they are executing the law, how they are providing justice, dispersing justice to folks. And so a lot of times you're not going to have a good opportunity to find information about these judges. I know personally, when it's time for retention voting where I live, I've had to actually just use Google to, read up and find out what pops up about this judge, type in their name into Google, type decisions or cases, and see where they've landed on certain things. That's unfortunately how a lot of people are making decisions. Yeah, they're getting in the ballot box, behind the curtain, and they're having to pull out their phone and Google these judges to find out who they are and what they're about. And so I think that that's just one opportunity. And it should also be noted that if a judge is really not doing their job, they're most likely going to be impeached, which is more likely to happen than not being retained, or they're going to resign before this happens. So retention, to not retain a judge is very difficult here in the Commonwealth.
Yes, but to your earlier point about the politicization of the courts, impeachment has also become a political tool, right? The threat of impeaching justices who, can you explain about how that works? So impeachment essentially is initiated in the legislature. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, so we could even take a case that happened here in 2018. We had our Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that our 2011 congressional maps were unconstitutional, that they were an unfair partisan gerrymander. And it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that ruled those maps were unconstitutional and ruled that we needed to create new maps that we used in a very recent election here in the Commonwealth. And so we know that what happened after that decision was made is that we had a few legislators coming out of rural parts of the state, including Jefferson County and others, who decided that they wanted to then impeach our Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices based upon the decision to throw out the gerrymandered map. And so that's important to know is that that comes out of the legislature. They can, put that forward as a resolution. It can be voted on by their colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and then a judge could be impeached. It doesn't happen. Again, this is something that doesn't happen very often. I can think of one case in which a judge was impeached. I think it had something to do with writing out prescription drugs or something to that effect. But I mean, it has to be something that's really absurd in order to be impeached from the Supreme Court and other appellate courts. But we have had that here in Pennsylvania just in 2018, where we had legislators, state representative at the time, who wanted to impeach just five of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices based upon the decision to throw out gerrymandered partisan maps.
Thanks, Kadita. We're wrapping up soon, so if you have any questions, please get them in now. This question was from Darwin, directed at Kathleen. But I think it brings up a really interesting question about what the role of our appellate sort of legislative branch. The question was, what do you think is an effective way for the executive branch to work with the judicial branch? Which I think is an interesting question, right? Our judicial branch is meant to be independent, but to what extent is it supposed to work with our executive and our legislative branch, or is it really supposed to, be over here in its independent zone?
Well, I'm going back to my political science days during undergrad, but the three branches of government are completely independent. The judicial branch is co-equal with the legislative branch and the executive branch. And so therefore, the judiciary has their particular roles. They not only are in charge of the courts, but also the regulation of attorneys, because we serve at the pleasure of the judicial branch. The Supreme Court regulates, what attorneys do. Now, from time to time, obviously, you have to remember what you learned in maybe high school, like how does a bill become law, right? And how does the governor step in? And then there could be a challenge to that law, and that ends up in the courts, right? So then the courts decide that. So again, it's three co-equal branches of government. We do depend on funding, however, in many instances in large part from the legislative branch. So that's always something that is separate. The Supreme Court does need funding. So that's something we would go to them on. And certainly, there's certainly things I'm sure that the three branches agree on, in terms of, we're all here to serve our residents, the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And therefore, our branch is very independent. We take care of, taking care of the law, making sure the law is applied properly. This is the role of the courts, and that's our part. And then the legislative has their part, and of course, the executive branch has their part. So, three separate branches, all co-equal.
Thanks, Kathleen. So we are nearing our end, and I want to do sort of classic reporter thing here, which is ask our panelists, what didn't we talk about? Or, if you had a minute, what do you want people to walk away from this conversation with that maybe we weren't able to get to, or that you think is a point that we brought up that should just really be hammered home and highlighted for folks? Kadita, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you again for this opportunity, and all the people that are watching this out there on Zoom and different platforms. So thank you very much for this. I just want to say that we need to continue to protect the independence of our courts. I don't think there's too much more important than that in this moment. I stand before you today as a woman of color, and I know that the courts are where my ancestors and others have gone for justice. And so we must protect the independence of the court. As Kathleen mentioned, they are a co-equal independent branch of government. They should not be politicized, and we should not have executive branches or our legislative branch interfere with what is happening in our judiciary. And so I would love to bring home the point that we need to protect our independent judiciary. We also need to make sure that it is more representative here in the Commonwealth of the demographics here in the Commonwealth. For us to have one judge out of 31 judges on our appellate courts to be a person of color is a disservice to the Commonwealth. There are perspectives that are brought along to these judgeships, be it if you were someone who was a defense attorney and have become a judge, or you were a prosecutor and become a judge, or you're a professor and become a judge. It's so important that we have a representation on these courts. This is one of these branches of government that folks, have a love for, but not really an understanding of what the courts do. And so it is so important that we protect their independence and we get to learn more about it. And so this is not easy. We have people, hundreds of people watching this right now on a Thursday afternoon who have interest in this, but there are 6.9 million folks who cast a ballot in this last election. And we need for 6.9 million plus to learn about this so they can cast their ballots on November 2nd for these judicial races and be confident about the decisions that they're making. That's the worst part about this, is that we get behind those curtains, or if we have a mail-in ballot sent to us at home, you'll have the opportunity to kind of take your time to Google these folks and learn more about them. But if you're there just voting on November 2nd in the polls, you're gonna have to take your time there as well to kind of figure out what it is you want to do. We want to make informed decisions. We want to make the decisions that are best for us as individuals, and we want to vote our values. And so I just encourage everyone just to take a little bit of time before November 2nd to read up about who it is that's running for these judgeships and learn about them. You can follow up who these folks are. I mean, obviously we have the Bar Association is going to provide professional information, but a lot of these folks are on Facebook and on Twitter. And how do they talk about their weekends? Are they volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club? Or are they on golf clubs, golf resorts, and golfing with certain people? So, just be very informed about the decisions that you're making.
Thank you so much for that, Khadija. Kathleen?
Well done. That's you did lovely with your remarks. The judicial branch is extremely important to all citizens. We are a nation of laws. We are a commonwealth of laws. The rule of law is so important. We all know by events that we've seen how important the rule of law is, how important it is to have lawyers that will represent both sides of a dispute, how important it is to have judges who are fair and impartial that will hear your dispute and rule on your dispute. So it's very important as citizens that you vote. It's very, very important. And you need to be educated, I agree. And please read the ratings that the Pennsylvania Bar Judicial Evaluation Commission has issued. Read the reviews, the Judicial Commission reviews in the counties where you live. Those are very helpful guides to you. And remember how important the rule of law is, and that we really want to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that's what we as lawyers do. We're sworn to uphold those documents, and so are the judges that are here for you as well. So I hope this was helpful and educational to you. And I also thank you so much for letting me be part of this program today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. We appreciate it so much. Danielle, do you have anything to take away for folks?
Yeah, so I will just talk about, what I as a reporter am looking at and thinking about, going forward in the months and weeks ahead. And in reporting a different story entirely, I was talking with an attorney who said, laws are only as good as the challenges to them. So, the written law is going to be dissected and analyzed and interpreted in courts. And that is just, one of the many reasons, many have been said by my co-panelists, that it's important to, pay attention to the courts. I think that we have talked about this already, but I do just want to repeat, I think it bears repeating, that, this is an interesting time to be voting for judges, especially because next year in Pennsylvania, there is a gubernatorial election. And if, Republican Republican politicians consolidate power in the governor's office and also the legislature, that is going to have the judicial branch see a lot more fights. We've seen that in Texas. There was a decision or a lack of decision to take up a case regarding abortion, and that is, has ramifications for everybody in the state. Similarly here, I am looking forward to see if, a lot of fights that you would normally see in the legislature are going to be playing out in the judicial branch, in the courts of the state, because there are a lot of these same, both kind of culture war issues, but also just, really bread and butter issues that there's disagreement on. But, the various groups, ACLU, human rights groups, or groups from the other side, conservative groups who are disagreeing with decisions that have been made, are suing. And so, I am curious to see how those lawsuits are gonna play out and affect the future of the state.
Thank you, Danielle. Before I turn this over to Chris, I just want to thank Danielle, Kadita, and Kathleen so much. Again, my message is be prepared as well. I wanted to drop one more resource into the chat, which is the court system's cases of public interest, which I think is super interesting. If there's, the folks on the ballot for Supreme Court, for example, are already judges, you can find some opinions they've been a part of here. You can read it. You can sort of digest what their thinking looks like and how they've ruled on these bigger cases. So that's another tool to be prepared. But again, thank you all so much. Chris, back over to you.
Great, thank you so much. We're at the end of our time together this afternoon, but I want to thank everyone once again for what is really an essential and informative discussion. And it's events like this, public service events like this, that really are part of the core mission of Spotlight PA, which was created in sort of a different vein from the newsrooms of old, community-led, community-supported, with a true and hard public service mission. Essential to that mission is Spotlight PA and ensuring all Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism to be informed, equipped, and empowered at the polls. So as we like to say at the end of every event, all of our events, this conversation was wonderful, but it really was just the beginning. Now is the time to get out, to do your homework, and return your mail ballot or prepare to vote on November 2nd. No matter what party or what position you take, we all should be involved in our democracy. Today's event was a free public service provided by Spotlight PA, and so this is the time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are able to do so, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate now. Contributions are tax deductible. And any amount helps us keep this programming free and available to all, and especially those who need it most. Thank you to everyone once again who has become a member today and already supported it. And thank you to all who have attended. It was so great to see everyone. We hope you have a great end to your week and a great weekend. Talk to you all soon.